You ever just look around and think about all the electronics we have? Like, it seems like every corner of my house has at least one old phone or a charger cable or even like, remember those old iPods? What even happened to those?
Yeah, totally. And you know what's really kind of crazy to think about is like where it all goes, right?
Yeah.
Because when you look at it on a larger scale, say a country like India, we're talking about a truly massive amount of electronic waste.
I mean, I know we live in a pretty tech-heavy world now. I try to keep up, but it seems like every other week there's some new gadget or upgrade or must-have device.
It is kind of relentless, and all that shiny new tech adds up. I mean, just in the last year, India generated something like 1.7 million metric tons of e-waste.
Wow, 1.7 million. That's honestly hard to even visualize.
It is. It's just an astronomical number.
Yeah.
And the thing is, it's not just a gradual increase. It's actually doubled in just 6 years. So you can really see the scale of this growing e-waste challenge.
Okay, so that old phone in my drawer is part of this like mountain of 1.7 million tons of e-waste. But where's it all going? Does it all get recycled?
That's a really good question. And it's a lot more complex than you might think. It's not all ending up in some high-tech recycling facility. In reality, a lot of it is being handled by what we call the informal sector.
Informal sector. What does that even mean?
So it's basically a vast network of scrap dealers, individuals who are often working in pretty challenging conditions with limited resources to collect and process e-waste. They're kind of like the front line, dealing with the sheer volume of what we're throwing away.
So they're the ones taking apart our old TVs and computers and stuff.
Yeah, exactly. And it's important to recognize the crucial role they play. But at the same time, there are some serious concerns, both for the environment and for the health of the people involved.
I can imagine like using harsh chemicals and stuff. That sounds pretty risky. So it sounds like this whole informal e-waste situation is something the government's trying to tackle.
Yeah, absolutely. In fact, just back in September, they ruled out some pretty significant new regulations that are really shaking things up.
New regulations, like what specifically are they trying to change?
Well, the main focus is on getting the big electronics companies, the Samsungs and Hitachis of the world, to take more responsibility for what happens to their products at the end of their life.
That makes sense. I mean, they're the ones making and selling all these electronics in the first place. So it seems fair they should be involved in figuring out how to recycle them.
Exactly. The principle behind these new rules is what's called extended producer responsibility, or EPR. It's basically saying, okay, you're putting these products out into the market, so you also have a responsibility to make sure they're recycled properly.
Shifting the responsibility upstream, that's a pretty big shift, isn't it?
It is. And it's causing quite a stir, actually. These companies, some of them huge global corporations, are pushing back pretty hard against these new rules. They've even taken the government to court in New Delhi.
Wow, to court. That sounds pretty serious. It seems like this is a pretty pivotal moment for how e-waste is going to be handled in India going forward.
Yeah, it really is. On one side, you have the government trying to create a more structured and environmentally sound system. And on the other, you have these major industries raising some serious questions and concerns. It's a real clash between those environmental goals and the realities of doing business.
So let's dive into the specifics. What are the main points of contention here? What's at stake for the companies, for the folks who are trying to build a legitimate recycling industry, and ultimately for us, the consumers?
It's a bit of a tug of war, that's for sure. So let's unpack it piece by piece. First, the government really wants to move away from this reliance on the informal sector. They want to see a more organized, environmentally friendly system where e-waste is properly handled. And that's where these new regulations come in. They say that manufacturers are now responsible for making sure a certain percentage of the e-waste generated by their products actually gets recycled.
That makes sense in theory, but I imagine that kind of responsibility probably comes with a price tag, right? And I'm guessing that's where the pushback from these companies is coming from.
You hit the nail on the head. These new regulations mean increased costs for the companies. The government has set minimum prices that manufacturers have to pay to recyclers for handling the e-waste. It's something like 22 rupees per kilo for TVs and fridges, and 34 rupees per kilo for smartphones. Now, that might not sound like a lot, but when you're talking about the sheer volume of electronics these companies are selling, the cost can quickly add up to millions of dollars.
Millions. Wow, that's a pretty significant hit. I read that Johnson Controls Hitachi, they make air conditioners. They said their cost would go up to something like $2.6 million a year just to recycle their AC units. It sounds like they used to pay way less, like 6 rupees a kilo or something.
Exactly, and they're not the only ones. There are industry groups representing companies like Samsung and LG that are also raising concerns about these new costs. Samsung even said that their recycling costs could increase by 15 times. And even LG, in their paperwork for their IPO, mentioned these new regulations as potentially having a significant impact on their finances. So you can understand why this is causing so much anxiety for these companies.
It's a big deal for sure. It seems like they're caught between a rock and a hard place. They have to either absorb these huge new costs or pass them on to consumers, which obviously no one really wants.
It's a tough situation for everyone.
Right.
But there's another perspective we need to consider here, and that's the perspective of the formal recyclers, the ones who are trying to build a responsible e-waste management industry.
Right. The ones who are investing in the proper infrastructure and doing things by the book. It seems like these new regulations would be a good thing for them, right?
It's a game changer for them, absolutely. For a long time, they've been struggling to compete with the informal sector because the prices for recycling were so low. It just wasn't economically viable for them to invest in better technologies and processes when they were basically being undercut all the time.
So these new regulations are a way to level the playing field, make responsible recycling actually profitable.
That's the idea.
Yeah.
I was reading about one guy, Nitin Gupta. He runs a big formal recycling operation, and he was saying how the old prices were just peanuts. Like, imagine trying to recycle a whole washing machine for $10. It's just not sustainable.
Wow, that's crazy low. So he's probably pretty happy about these new rules then.
Oh, he's thrilled. He sees this as a chance for the formal sector to really grow, to invest in even better recycling technologies, to handle more of the country's e-waste in a responsible way. It's a step towards a true circular economy for electronics, where resources are reused and nothing goes to waste.
So it's this fascinating tension, isn't it? These big companies are worried about the bottom line, while the formal recyclers are seeing this as a huge opportunity. But let's not forget the bigger picture here. We're talking about India, the third largest generator of e-waste in the world. That's a massive problem that needs a real solution.
You're absolutely right, and unfortunately, the rate of formal recycling in India has been pretty low. Only about 43% of e-waste is actually being recycled through these proper channels.
So that means the majority of it, almost 80%, is still going through these informal channels with all the environmental and health risks as we talked about earlier.
Exactly. And to really understand the human side of this, think about someone like Mustaqim Malik. He's this 60-year-old scrap dealer in Gujarat, and he's literally making his living by taking apart old electronics by hand. You can picture his workshop, piles of discarded gadgets everywhere. It's tough work, and it's definitely not safe.
You can see why the government is so concerned about this whole situation. It's not just about the economics, it's about protecting people and the environment.
Absolutely. They're saying, look, we have over 300 authorized recyclers across the country who are doing things the right way. We can't let this whole system be undermined by companies trying to cut corners and save money.
I mean, you can see their point. If it becomes a race to the bottom on price, who knows what kind of shortcuts people might take to make a quick buck?
That's the fear. And it could have serious consequences for the environment and for public health. So the government is really trying to enforce these new rules, even though it might mean slightly higher prices for consumers.
So ultimately, it comes down to a choice, doesn't it? Do we want cheap electronics or do we want a cleaner, safer environment? And maybe that's something we all need to think about.
It is a big question.
Yeah.
And I think it's one that each of us as consumers has a role in answering. What kind of future do we want for India? Do we want to keep relying on these informal practices that are putting people and the environment at risk? Or are we willing to pay a little bit more to support a more responsible system?
That's a really thought-provoking way to put it. And honestly, it makes you think twice about just throwing away that old phone without giving it a second thought. It's part of a much bigger system, a system that we all have a stake in.
It is. And the choices we make, both as individuals and as a society, are going to have a real impact on how this e-waste challenge unfolds in the years to come.
It's definitely something I'll be thinking about the next time I upgrade my phone. Thanks for sharing your expertise with us. It's been really enlightening.
Of course, it's been a pleasure talking with you.
That's it for our deep dive today, folks. Be sure to check back next week for another insightful discussion. And in the meantime, maybe take a look around your own home. You might be surprised at what you find hiding in those drawers and closets.
You never know what kind of e-waste treasures you might uncover.
Until next time.
See you then.